We're standing ready. Lord needs, I could take a guess. Oh, would you please? We are ready. I'm lifted by the Spirit's peace. I guess we're never going home. Never journey sunshine. Could never be alone. Well, I guess I'm well adjusted, but the pains they never leave, except for my feet. I keep my arms in my suitcases and my shoulders halfway down to the ground.
Hello humans, welcome back to the Slackline Quote of the Day broadcast. It is Friday. You are listening to The Boss.
The boss is coming!
That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you
We are at January 19th, 2018, coming at you from Vancouver, Canada. We are chatting any type of quotes or anything that kind of sparks my interest, sparks Greg's interest, or our engineer in the sound booth. We're breaking things down from my own personal perspective and giving everybody a taste of what I think. So our sponsor today, Instant Enlightenment. Just mix with hot water and let the smooth taste of Nirvana wash over you. That is Instant Enlightenment, bringing us our quote today. And our quote today comes from the Buddha himself, and it is, "The thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love, born out of concern for all beings. As the shadow follows the body, as we think, so we become." That is Buddha from the 5th century BC. I think that's how I'm supposed to read that. That was a quote I came across today, and it sparked my interest for this Friday afternoon because actually there's a Buddhist temple right across the street from me, and I walk Boris past there every day, and I've always considered possibly going in there. I'm not a religious person at all. In fact, I'm actually very against organized religion as a whole. But Buddhism kind of attracts me a little bit, I think, because it's not really organized, or not in the sense that something like Christianity or Islam is. It's very much more of like an individual spiritualism, an individual way of life than it is about worshiping a deity or something like that, which is what I think what really draws me to Buddhism. It follows a teacher, not a deity, or at least in its traditional form. Yeah, there are a few forms of Buddhism as it's grown through the years. It started with apparently like the son of a king named Siddhartha Gautama, and he was locked away and provided a bunch of luxuries and everything of the world, but was actually kind of a prisoner, and he escaped a few times from his palace and saw the injustices of the real world, and left his life of luxury behind and sought an enlightenment by fasting and by meditating, and ended up meditating under a tree for a month and reaching Nirvana. And that's something that interests me in itself. Like whenever you hear of religious people having religious experiences or something like that, or new religions born out of a vision that somebody had, when I look at applying something like meditating and fasting to modern knowledge, it makes sense to me that somebody, after long periods of that, potentially on the verge of even death from starvation, their brain can start doing crazy things, hallucinating and that type of thing, especially if they've just been sitting in silence and in their own mind, for as long a period as that. It makes sense that they would start to see visuals and have out of body experiences and stuff like that. I'm not discounting that those are things. Like, I think it's interesting that somebody maybe went into that state and came out with a totally different outlook on life, that involved, like the quote says, concern for all beings and developing proper character and stuff, that they turned that into a teaching and that people actually followed that teaching. I see that as just kind of, following any sort of leader that you think has the right idea versus following somebody who claims to be like divinity on earth or God incarnate or something along those lines. So yeah, he kind of brought about what traditional Buddhism looks at as the Four Noble Truths to live by, and the first one is all life is suffering, which I think we could all kind of agree with if you think about it. The source of suffering is desire, is number 2. And number 3 is to rid yourself of desire to stop the suffering. That's probably where most of the actual discipline and rituals and things like that come into Buddhism. And to follow an eightfold, and the fourth noble truth is to follow an eightfold path, which kind of is a cheat to me. It makes it more like, well, why aren't there just 11 noble truths instead of 4 noble truths, one of which contains 8? Anyways, the eightfold path is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And I think that it's attractive to people, or it became attractive to people because, it was a way of finding enlightenment without dying, really. You could find enlightenment in this life. You could find enlightenment, without passing through judgment or something like that. You can achieve it yourself by living in this, what is looked at as kind of a selfless manner. We can look into that a little bit more, because I wouldn't necessarily call ridding yourself of desire selfless, because other people play into your desires too, and other people desire things from you, and if you don't participate in those things, then you are obviously, kind of selfish in a weird way. But so that's why Buddhism kind of picked up, because people, like the idea of following like a personal path, which would lead to like greater, harmony for everybody, versus, trying to institutionalize these ideas and spread them that way. Something that really hits me from the first kind of incarnation of Buddhism is the control of thought, and it plays back into the quote here. It's the basis of it, right? The thought manifests as word, and on down the list, it becomes our actions. I've always kind of considered it impossible to control your thoughts. But I guess that is kind of the whole basis of something like Buddhism, something like meditation. I like maybe I'm looking at meditation wrong, but I kind of figured meditation was more like allowing your brain to take its own path versus trying to control what you're thinking about or where it's going. Maybe that's a wrong way to look at it. I know more people kind of consider it of just, pushing everything out of your mind and living. I don't know if that means living in a blank. See, to me, like pushing everything out of your mind means not controlling it, because I don't think that you can really control the fleeting thoughts that enter and leave. I would think that meditation more involves allowing those fleeting thoughts to enter and leave as they go, versus dwelling on any one of them. I mean, how can you reach something like enlightenment without actually thinking, without actually, thinking and considering and pondering, all different synonyms for thinking. So maybe that's a fundamental disconnect that would kind of preclude me from something like Buddhism. But there is a newer version of Buddhism. I mean, new being relative, because it's still thousands of years ago. But as Buddhism kind of grew, the people who were leaders, they tried to kind of socially integrate these ideas, so that everybody could kind of live by them, more as like a law format, versus a personal code of ethics or mindfulness. And so its kind of new direction was more geared as a need to take care of each other and spread social welfare versus really like concentrating on yourself and spreading goodness that way. So it focused on proper behavior towards everybody, not in like a class system necessarily, but proper behavior just towards people, whether that be employees or servants or anything like that. Respect and generosity. And so, I mean, the only thing that really plays into that from the previous incarnation of Buddhism is that the proper behavior is kind of achieved from following the Four Noble Truths, and from that proper behavior you will respect the people around you, and you will provide generosity and social welfare and that type of thing. And this is also where the whole like not killing living things comes from. I mean, I'm sure it was a propensity of all of these things: right view, right intention, right speech, right action. I'm sure it would fall under right intention or right action when considering the Eightfold Path. But as far as like not killing any living beings, and as it's applied to even the smallest of things, how low does that go? Because I know a lot of people take Buddhism and translate it into like veganism and stuff like that, which makes sense. And it's something that I've had a tough time getting around, because honestly, like I have a tough time with the substitutes for meat, the protein substitutes, not just like things that are fake meat, but like beans and those types of things. Anyways, the veganism, I mean, when you're talking about living things, I mean, even like plants are alive too, right? And they have microorganisms in there that are living and acting, on a level of what we would call life. So where does that end? Does it end at a certain nanometer length or something? That type of thing. I mean, maybe that line of thinking is what basically breaks down most religions for me, and ties me to not really aligning myself with anything, including atheism, because while I don't believe in God or anything like that, I can't say for sure what happens to our consciousness after we die. And so as far as things like Buddhism and things like Hinduism reaching different levels of energy and consciousness, like I don't really discount those types of ideas, which is, I think, why something like Buddhism is attractive to me. So I think going back to it, the only thing that kind of keeps me away from it, I think, is this possible fundamental issue of controlling your thoughts and how that works. And I think I'd really like to speak to an actual Buddhist about it. I'm considering maybe just walking over there and maybe sitting and seeing if anybody wants to just chat about it for a little while, because I'd love to learn more. I did take a course on religion in university, and so that's kind of, as far as my knowledge goes, we spent like a few weeks on Buddhism, or like a class and a half on Buddhism or whatever. I always found it really interesting more because it's personal. You don't have to necessarily go to like the church, and you don't necessarily, it doesn't have this cultish feeling. Like I grew up Catholic, and we went to church as a kid, as most Catholics do. It started out every Sunday when we were younger, and as we got busier and busier, it grew into, Christmas and Easter. And then, when I was 14 or 15, I decided it was all bullshit and didn't go anymore. And I haven't really been since, other than the odd time when we're with our grandparents or something like that. But even then, I've now kind of taken a stance of sort of refusing to go, because I've been to a few like kind of gatherings, for lack of a better term, centered around Catholicism and Christianity that are, they're things that my parents dragged us to when they were going through the divorce, certain like self-help seminars and that type of deal, that, it just kind of brought about a really cultish sort of attitude to me of everybody having this same idea about something, and like we have to conform to this sort of thought process, and everything has to be about God's love and how you can invite them into your life and that type of thing. And honestly, a few of them the last one I attended, actually, me and my younger brother just like left. We looked at each other like, dude, do you want to be here anymore? Like, no. And then so we told our dad that we were going to go take a break, and we didn't come back to it because it was just, I don't know, it gave me an uneasy feeling. But the idea of internalizing everything and kind of trying to reach a level of consciousness for just like myself and the people around me that allows me to, operate maybe a bit more altruistically, or maybe a bit less hypocritically throughout life. That interests me. So from a teaching perspective, a teaching of discipline and a teaching of like self-moderation and stuff like that, I find Buddhism to be something that is very intriguing. So I think I might go across the street and talk to those people in the next couple of days and just see if anybody wants to have a chat with me. But yeah, maybe we'll leave it there. That is it for the Slackline quote of the day for this week. TGIF, thank you very much to anybody who's listening. We will go through that quote again. That quote is from the Buddha. The thought manifests itself as the word manifests itself as the deed. The deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love, born out of concern for all beings. As the shadow follows the body, as we think, so we become. That again is Buddha. And that quote again is brought to us by Instant Enlightenment. For those who don't want to go through the rigorous process of self-discipline and moderation, Instant Enlightenment, just mix with hot water and let the smooth taste of Nirvana wash over you. Maybe that's a cheaper and easier way to go than going across the street and devoting myself to an entire religion. But I have my concerns about whether or not Instant Enlightenment is achievable. But they are bringing us our quote today anyways. Again, Instant Enlightenment, just mix with water and let smooth taste of Nirvana wash over you. Thanks again to the Crooked Spies and Aksel Boss for providing their music today. If you're not following the Slackline on Instagram, it is at theslack.line. On Twitter at slackline_radio, and YouTube at the Slackline podcast. Make sure you guys are all subscribing and following and all that fun stuff. You have been listening to The Boss.
The boss is coming! That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you.
Thanks again to anybody who's tuning in. You have been listening to the Slackline quote of the day. Happy Friday, happy weekend, anybody. We will talk to you again on Sunday with the Lars Slackline, and see you again Monday for the next quote of the day. Have a great week.
I'm gonna call you out, 'cause you ain't what you claim to be. Say you're a working man, but you ain't got no grit, you got no glory. What kind of man are you? Say you're noble, your best.